Since its first release in 1997, the Fallout series has remained one of the most popular in all of gaming. The games tell a massive story that spans hundreds of years of lore, with both games that are self-contained and ones that are part of a greater shared Fallout universe. With so many games and so many stories spanning such a large amount of time, keeping track of the Fallout games in chronological order can certainly be a challenge, but one absolutely worthwhile for fans of the series. Starting with Fallout 76. Although it's the most recent game to come out, Fallout 76 is chronologically set the earliest. The game takes place in the year 2102, and it covers an event that is incredibly significant to the wider lore of Fallout. Serving as a prequel to the main games, it's set 25 years after the nuclear war that devastated the world during the era of Reconstruction. The player controls one of the lucky or arguably unlucky few who survived the bombs in the Vault-Tec-made shelter, Vault 76. These are the characters controlled by people who populate the world of Fallout 76. The goal of these chosen few is to resettle the wastelands and try to get the world back on track. Next is Fallout. While the residents of Vault 76 return to the surface just 25 years after the Great War, many of the people living in vaults are still underground by the time of the first Fallout game. This includes the player character, a dweller in Vault 13. The protagonist is sent by the Vault's overseer to the wastelands to replace the water chip, a device used for the recycling of water. Development on the surface world at this point in the chronology is fairly modest, even by the standards of the wasteland, but there is a settlement in the game called Shady Sands. The protagonist of the first game is unable to return to their home vault at the end, and by remaining on the surface, helps to kickstart the development of the wastelands. Next in the timeline is Fallout Tactics: Brotherhood of Steel. The world of Fallout at this point on the timeline is still far from the landscape of many major factions and civilizations that many are familiar with. However, in the late 2100s, there was still early signs of what would become. This is because of Fallout Tactics look into the franchise's most consistently represented faction, the titular Brotherhood of Steel. Fallout Tactics is an interesting entry, as while most of the games will allow the player to explore different factions and groups as an individual and then decide if they wish to join one, this game starts the player out as an initiate member of the notorious Brotherhood of Steel. By the later games, the Brotherhood has become a militaristic and technological superpower, so it's fascinating to see them at a much earlier stage of building up their military strength. Next up, Fallout: Brotherhood of Steel. Not to be confused with Fallout Tactics, 2004's Brotherhood of Steel is an action RPG released exclusively on consoles. While not considered one of the best Fallout games, this entry did introduce the franchise to PlayStation and Xbox owners, so it's still an important part of the franchise's legacy. That said, the game is not considered canon, and its events are essentially never referenced by any of the other releases. Consequently, there is really no reason to play this title if someone is specifically looking to consume all of Fallout's lore. Fallout Shelter is also not canon and does not quite fit in the Fallout timeline, although it's assumed to place between Fallout 3 and 4. Next up, Fallout 2. Although it takes place almost 100 years after the first game, Fallout 2 serves as kind of a direct narrative sequel to it. The player takes control of a descendant of the original game's main character, who leads the humble surface village of Arroyo, originally founded by the Vault Dweller of the first game. This is a major point in time for the Fallout chronology, as it shows the first signs of major development in the new America. After the player obtains the Garden of Eden creation kit, they help the village of Arroyo become a major city as part of the new California Republic, which would go on to become one of the biggest and most significant factions in the whole series. Next up, Fallout 3. The first of the 3D games, and likely the first games a lot of fans played, Fallout 3 continues the series of world events established previously. However, it does jump to the opposite side of the country from New California over to the remains of Washington, D.C., giving players a fresh and oddly beautiful look at a new location to explore. By now in the chronology, a proper sense of civilization can be felt in the post-war United States, though still a somewhat crude one. Fallout 3's placement on the timeline puts it well after the age of the Vaults. Despite this, players remember in the introduction of the game, the protagonist is shown to have been born and raised into adulthood within a vault. This is because Vault 101 was intended as an experiment to see a group of survivors living indefinitely in a vault, rather than until they can return to the surface to settle the wastelands. Next up, Fallout New Vegas. Returning to the West 40 years after the great cities were being built in Fallout 2, the new California Republic is now a fully operational federal government with territories spanning almost the entirety of the west coast of the US, stretching all the way into Nevada. They still face struggles, however, as they fight a brutal war for control against Caesar's Legion. The game takes place 4 years after Fallout 3 on the timeline. Uniquely, the player character of Fallout New Vegas is a courier instead of a vault dweller, making it the only main game to have a protagonist entirely from the new society developed from the Wastelands. The region may be more developed than in games further back on the timeline, but in true Fallout fashion, there is still plenty of terrifying monsters populating the vast desert region. And finally, Fallout 4. The latest game on the chronology, Fallout 4 takes place 10 years after the events of Fallout 3 and only a few years after Fallout New Vegas. The player can now explore a region known as the Commonwealth, which is the remains of Boston and some of the wider New England region. While officially the furthest into the future chronologically, Fallout 4's opening does provide a playable glimpse of pre-war America, initially set in 2077, which is the earliest playable time in the franchise. The bulk of the game takes place 210 years after the bombs drop, as the main character, known as the sole survivor, is cryogenically frozen, finally emerging in 2287. That was a brief overview of the chronological order of events in the games. Thank you for watching Game Rant. I'm Cameron, and we'll see you next time.